I never thought I'd be here, writing about how my seemingly perfect life with Emily fell apart. We had been married for 12 years with an 8-year-old son, Ethan, and from the outside we looked like the ideal family. I thought so too. Sure, there were a few rough patches, but nothing that made me question our bond. Emily and I met in college where everything felt like a fairy tale. We married soon after graduation, and Ethan came into our lives a few years later. Everything was going smoothly, or so I thought. Lately, though, something had changed. Emily started coming home late, staying at work for meetings that seemed to stretch longer and longer. She began taking random business trips that never seemed necessary before. First, I brushed it off. I figured she was just stressed from work. But over time, her behavior shifted in ways I couldn't ignore. She became cold, distant, easily irritated when I asked about her day. She started making excuses, little lies about where she had been or who she was with. And yet, I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. It was easier to believe that everything was fine than to face the possibility that something was terribly wrong. I was about to learn how wrong I had been. It wasn't until one evening, completely by accident, that everything I had been pushing to the back of my mind came crashing down. Emily had gone out with some coworkers, another late-night networking event, or so she claimed. I was home with Ethan, putting him to bed. Once he was asleep, I settled down in the living room, scrolling through my phone when a notification popped up on Emily's laptop. She had left it open on the kitchen counter, and it wasn't locked. I hesitated for a moment. I'd never been the kind of guy to snoop, but something in my gut told me I needed to check. I wish I hadn't. What I found would change everything. The message that had popped up was from a guy named Jake. I didn't know who Jake was, but the way they were talking to each other wasn't how you talk to a colleague or even a friend. It was flirty, intimate. My stomach turned as I scrolled up, and that's when I saw the photos. Photos of Emily, dressed provocatively, sent to him. There were no signs of work stress, no signs of long meetings or late nights spent on office tasks. This was something else entirely. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Emily was having an affair. I could barely breathe. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. All the late nights, the excuses, the coldness. It all made sense now. She wasn't overworked. She was spending her time with someone else. Someone she had kept hidden from me for who knows how long. My hands were shaking, but I kept reading, needing to know how deep this went. And it went deep. Jake wasn't just some fling. They had been involved for months. I felt sick. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a long-term betrayal. The next day, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I had to confront her. I waited until Ethan was at school, and when Emily came home, I was ready. I was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of me. She walked in, immediately sensing that something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. I didn't mince words. "Who's Jake?" I asked, my voice steady but my heart pounding. Her face froze. Then she tried to play it off. "Jake? He's just a colleague. Why are you asking?" I could see the lie in her eyes. "A colleague? Then why are you sending him pictures like this?" I turned the laptop toward her, showing her the messages and photos I had found. For a moment, she was silent. Then the excuses started pouring out. "It's not what you think, David. It's just, it was stupid. Okay? A mistake. It didn't mean anything." Her voice was frantic, desperate, but I wasn't buying it. "A mistake? This has been going on for months. Emily, don't stand here and lie to me." I couldn't control the anger that was bubbling up inside me anymore. "I trusted you. I've been raising our son while you've been sneaking around behind my back. How could you do this?" She didn't have an answer, at least not one that made any sense. She started crying, apologizing, swearing that she would stop, that it didn't matter. But I knew better. As Emily stood there crying and stumbling over her excuses, I felt a strange numbness wash over me. I couldn't even look at her. The woman I had shared my life with, the mother of my child, was standing right in front of me, and I felt like I didn't even know her anymore. It was like I was looking at a stranger who had been living a double life right under my nose. I couldn't get Jake's name out of my head. How many times had she whispered it while telling me she was working late? How many times had she come home after being with him, lying right to my face, acting like everything was normal? My mind kept racing back to all the little signs I had ignored, the things that didn't add up but that I had convinced myself weren't worth worrying about. I felt like an idiot. But more than that, I felt betrayed in the deepest way possible. This wasn't just about Emily cheating on me. This was about everything she had let me believe. For years, I thought we were building a life together. I thought we had the same goals, the same dreams. I thought we were a team. But while I was working hard to support our family, she was off with someone else, building a completely separate life, one I wasn't a part of. I felt sick, physically sick. I could barely keep it together as she rambled on about how sorry she was, how she'd do anything to fix it. But I knew better. There was no fixing this. She had shattered the trust we had, and no amount of apologies could glue it back together. But then, something she said jolted me back to reality. "David, it's over now, okay? It was just a stupid mistake. I never meant for it to go this far. Please, let's just move past it." Move past it? How do you just move past finding out your wife has been cheating on you for months? How do you move past discovering that the life you thought you had was a complete lie? I was furious. She wasn't taking responsibility. She wasn't even really sorry. She was just sorry she got caught. And that hurt more than anything. "I can't just move past this, Emily," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been lying to me for months. You've been with him behind my back. How am I supposed to trust you again?" She looked at me, her face streaked with tears, and I could see the frustration boiling beneath her fragile exterior. She wasn't used to being confronted. She was used to being in control, to manipulating situations to her advantage. But not this time. "David," she snapped, "I made a mistake. I told you I was sorry. What else do you want from me? It's not like I didn't take care of things at home. I've been handling everything, and it's not like you've been perfect either." That was it. The switch flipped. "Handling things at home?" I spat, unable to contain the bitterness. "Handling things? You mean sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, lying to our son? Is that what you mean by handling things? Don't you dare turn this around on me, Emily. I've been nothing but good to you. I've worked hard. I've supported you. I've raised our son. And this is how you repay me." She rolled her eyes, and for a moment, the real Emily came out. The one I had ignored for years. Cold, calculating, and completely detached. "Oh, come on, David. Don't act like some saint. You've been working late too. You're never around. Always wrapped up in your own world. What did you expect? Maybe if you paid a little more attention, this wouldn't have happened." I felt the anger surge through me again. Hotter this time, but it wasn't just anger. It was sadness, heartbreak. I had done everything I could to make our life work, to build something real. But here she was, blaming me for her choices, for her betrayal. I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. She wasn't sorry. She didn't regret what she had done. She regretted getting caught, and now she was trying to make me the bad guy, to shift the blame so she wouldn't have to face what she had done. "I don't know who you are anymore," I whispered, feeling the last remnants of hope slip away. "But I'm done. We're done." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of panic in them. "David, no, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this." But I had made up my mind. There was no fixing something so broken. And more than that, I didn't want to fix it. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the woman I fell in love with. She was someone else entirely, someone I didn't want to be with anymore. "I'll be staying somewhere else for a while," I said, grabbing my keys and walking toward the door. "I'll talk to a lawyer about the divorce." "David, wait," she called after me, her voice frantic, but I didn't turn around. Couldn't. If I stayed any longer, I might lose whatever strength I had left. As I walked out the door, it hit me just how much I had lost. My marriage, my family, my future. Everything I had worked so hard for was gone. But as painful as it was, I knew I had made the right decision. There was no going back. The next few days were a whirlwind of confusion and pain. I had left the house and moved into a friend's place temporarily. I hadn't told many people what was going on yet, not even my family. I wasn't ready for those conversations, the questions, the pitying looks. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't stay in that house with Emily anymore. In the quiet moments, the weight of my decision started to settle in. I kept going over it in my head, wondering if I had made the right call. Could I have forgiven her? Could we have gone to counseling, worked through the betrayal? But every time I thought about it, the image of her and Jake together burned in my mind. The lies, the deceit. It wasn't something I could just move past. No matter how much she wanted to pretend it didn't matter. The Emily I thought I knew was gone. Maybe she had been gone for a long time, and I just didn't notice. Then there was Ethan. That was the hardest part of all of this. How do I tell my son that his family is falling apart? That everything he knows is about to change? I couldn't bear the thought of breaking his heart. He was too young to understand the details, but old enough to know something wasn't right. I had to be there for him, to protect him from the fallout as much as I could. I finally decided to talk to him after a few days. I picked him up from school and took him to the park, somewhere familiar, where he'd feel safe. We sat down on a bench, and I could see the worry in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, and I hated that I was about to confirm his worst fears. "Ethan, buddy, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You know how Mommy and I haven't been getting along very well lately?" He nodded, his little face full of concern. "Yeah. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "Mommy and I have decided that we need to spend some time apart. It doesn't have anything to do with you, okay? We both love you very much, and that's never going to change." Tears welled up in his eyes, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I hated seeing him like this, confused and hurt. "But why?" he asked softly. "Can't you just fix it?" How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes things can't be fixed? That sometimes love isn't enough to keep people together? I tried to find the words, but nothing felt right. In the end, all I could do was reassure him that he would still see both of us and that we would figure it out together. "We'll still see each other all the time, Ethan," I said, trying to sound confident. "You and I will have our time, and Mommy will have hers. But things are going to be a little different from now on." He didn't say much after that, just nodded and wiped his tears. I pulled him into a hug, and for a long time we just sat there in silence. I wanted to make everything better for him, but I knew this was going to be hard on all of us. Not long after that conversation, I started the process of filing for divorce. I had met with a lawyer earlier, and they advised me on how to move forward, especially when it came to custody of Ethan. That was my main priority. I didn't care about the house, the money, none of that mattered. All I cared about was making sure Ethan was okay and that he didn't get caught in the middle of all this mess. When I told Emily I was filing for divorce, her reaction was predictable. She didn't cry this time, didn't even seem shocked. Instead, she turned cold. The fake remorse she had shown when I first confronted her had vanished, replaced by anger. "Really, David?" she spat when I handed her the paperwork. "You're going to ruin our family over this? Over one mistake?" "One mistake," I repeated, incredulous. "You've been lying to me for months. This wasn't a one-time thing, Emily. This was a conscious decision you made over and over again." She glared at me, crossing her arms. "You've never been perfect either. You're not exactly the easiest person to live with, you know. Maybe if you had paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened." There it was again, her trying to twist the blame, making this about what I had done wrong instead of facing the reality of what she had done. I had no energy left to argue with her. I wasn't going to play her game. "We'll figure out custody for Ethan," I said, keeping my voice calm. "But this marriage is over. I've already made my decision. That set her off. "You're not taking Ethan away from me," she snapped. "I'll fight you for custody if I have to." I expected this. I had already talked to my lawyer about the possibility of a custody battle. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't going to let her use Ethan as a pawn to hurt me. "I'm not taking him away," I replied. "But we need to think about what's best for him, and this constant fighting isn't it." She didn't have much to say after that, just stormed out of the room. I knew this wasn't going to be the last battle between us, but I was prepared to fight for what was right. Ethan deserved stability, and I was going to make sure he had it, no matter how ugly things got with Emily. The weeks following our separation were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I moved into a small apartment, not far from where Ethan and Emily lived, so I could still be close to him. It was tough, adjusting to life without the routines I had known for over a decade. Coming home to an empty place, no longer hearing Ethan's laughter echoing through the house, was devastating at first. But as time passed, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. The constant tension, the lies, the walking on eggshells, it was gone. For the first time in years, I could breathe again. I started focusing on myself, rebuilding my life one step at a time. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I spent more time with Ethan, making sure he knew that, despite everything, he was still my priority. We started new traditions, weekend movie nights, trips to the park, things that made him feel like life was still normal, even if it wasn't the same as before. As for Emily, she and I communicated only when necessary, mostly about Ethan. There were still moments where she tried to provoke me, to get a reaction, but I had learned to let it roll off. She no longer had the power to hurt me. That chapter of my life was closed. Looking back, it's clear to me that this was the right decision, even though it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Sometimes you have to let go of what's broken to make room for something better.